My name is Jasmine Woodard with NACE, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Bridging the Skill Gap, Leveraging the NACE Competency Assessment Tool. We encourage you all to actively participate in the chat and please post questions in the Q&A. It is my pleasure to introduce Randy Bidding, Head of Strategy and Career Readiness at Suitable. Take it away, Randy.
All right, thanks, Jasmine. Appreciate everyone joining today's webinar. You probably see my background. I am currently at SOAS. So for those that are currently at SOAS or just left, I've been on the road for 2 weeks. I think Matthew and I spent a few days, and I'll introduce him here in a minute. Well, we spent 3 or 4 days last week at MPACE, and we'll get into some of the findings and some of the insights that we learned because this space moves so quickly. There's a lot of campuses iterating and just doing some great things around career readiness and specifically the NACE competencies. And so today we're going to kind of focus on really just how to measure these and use scientific validity to show some hard data on soft skills. So I'll first go ahead and share my screen and we'll go from there. And let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Randy, thanks for joining us today. Why don't you further introduce yourself?
Yeah, I was going to quickly just introduce my background, Matthew. For those that don't know me, I've been in this space. This is probably my 22nd NACE conference coming up. So I've been, we've known each other a long time, Matthew. It seems like yesterday where I rolled kind of that giant interview kiosk into where you used to work, St. Joseph's in Philadelphia. But yeah, that was kind of my first introduction to the space. As I was the founder and co-founder and CEO of InterviewStream, the first video interview platform, and kind of invented the asynchronous video interview. For those of you that use Handshake, I was one of the first people over at Handshake, and I'm responsible for that yellow handshare that's in a lot of offices out there. And then, during that time, I always kind of tell the story of how I got into kind of competencies. I was at the first competency symposium, which was at Clemson University. Shout out to that team and Tim Harding and his team at Tampa for hosting that. Matthew, you and I were there together, and I always tell the story. And I was talking to Tim Harding this morning at SOAS. He, from Tampa, he kind of asked everyone at that first competency symposium, all right, here's pillar number 4. How many of the 200 institutions in that room were measuring competencies? And you could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet. And that kind of changed the history of at least my introduction to competencies. And that's kind of when I co-founded Skills Survey and the Career Readiness Project with you, Matthew, and kind of teamed up with NACE to really kind of go through what we're going to talk about today is measuring competencies using scientifically validated behaviors that are tied to the competencies. And with Skills Survey and kind of that history, we launched the first career readiness project with about 180 institutions, and we had over 100,000 evaluators, or we're going to call them observers today. So supervisors and coworkers of students, either student employment or internships or co-ops, and measuring and ranking to the extent that they demonstrated these behaviors that tied to the competencies. So we're going to talk a lot about how you can get started with the new NACE competency and rubric to really start getting this feedback based on the observations of others, because the more early and often students can request constructive feedback, and from the observations of others, a lot of times they're just not self-aware that they're falling short in certain behaviors that are tied to the competency. So we've got a great agenda today. Matthew, this is probably my favorite picture of you, so I included it.
I'm so glad you did, Randy. Yeah, it's very flattering. Excellent. Well, everybody, my name is Matthew Brink. I'm the NACE Chief Content and Programs Officer. I've been with NACE since 2015, which is the year that NACE first released the competency framework. So I, as a staff member, have been sort of the principal lead on up until recently, all of our NACE career readiness initiatives. And before that, I was a member of NACE, worked in career centers at the University of Delaware, as Randy mentioned, at St. Joseph's University, and before that at small liberal arts schools in the Philly area, Bryn Mawr College, Haverford College, and Swarthmore College. So I'm all kind of Delaware Valley, Philly area professional, and glad to be with you today. So what we want to talk about today, as Randy mentioned, and you can advance the slide, is part of the rationale for how important it is for higher education institutions to consider and plan for a strategy that is focused on comprehensive campus-wide implementation of competencies is because of what's happening in the market, in industry. You can see here from this Indeed slide content that the number of employers that are focused on skills-based hiring is increasing, and they're decreasing the use of the GPA. NACE data reflects the same thing. Back in 2019, over 70% of employers were using GPA as a primary filter, and recently it's dropped almost in half. So you know that industry is hiring, they are attracting talent throughout the entire talent acquisition process. They're infusing competencies and skills into their internship program descriptions, their entry-level hiring, and I'll talk a bit more about this on the next slide. You can, in a minute, you can see, and I wanted to speak a little bit about just the history of the NACE competencies. So 2015, they were released. It was conceptual definitions of these competencies. And then the next slide shows that they progressed over time, where with our partnership with Skills Survey in the past, we validated evidence-based behaviors that were added to it. So that kind of brought it to the next level. And you can then advance the slide. And then we based on what Randy was talking about in terms of feedback from members, wanting to really figure out ways to measure the level of proficiency in the competency framework, NACE set out and developed this assessment tool. It was a 2-year process to conceptualize what the framework, the assessment tool would look like, its format. Once that was decided, we entered into 3 6-month phases of validity, reliability, and usability. There were over 100 institutions that participated, over 600 individuals, and a subset of that 600 was a little over 100 students that interacted with and gave us feedback so that we could refine it. And it was released just a few months ago. At that same time, we wanted to make sure that members had a chance to access the tool at no cost. So over half of the member organizations of NACE have already downloaded the free tool, but we also wanted to enter into this as a research project because there are no national benchmarks that point to the level of proficiency among students at this first year, the second year, and for community colleges, their second year and transition into career, and then also for 4-year schools, 3rd and 4th year, so that and then we also worked with our partners, Career Launch and Here Today Suitable, a demographic kind of profile so we can understand race, gender, ethnicity, first gen, veteran, levels of activities within different career readiness experiences, so that once this data is shared from our partners, we'll be able to release the first ever national benchmarks from all those demographic areas, with the goal of exploring the dynamics around what employers are saying in terms of there being a skills gap. So our data arrangement with Suitable and Career Launch is twice a year. We'll get a data dump January and July, and we'll start analyzing that data so we can release that. And then schools that are using one of our partners, for example, here Suitable with Randy, it provides an opportunity to scale the assessment tool across all of the units and departments that are collaborating on campus-wide implementation, along with the opportunity to hone in on particular programs or particular experiences. And also this will be the first ever tool to be used both by academic affairs and student affairs, so that measurement can happen more holistically. So we're very excited about the prospect of all of this unfolding in the months and years to come, and we're thrilled to be in partnership with Suitable. So you can go to the next slide. We know that career students are focusing on these top three competencies as the most important for them to hone. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there's a real alignment with what employers seek. If you look at the top three, they align completely with what students are also valuing and seeking. So we love the fact that there's this alignment. And then you can go to the next slide. And then, so I started with the skills-based hiring slide. We collected data from our employers about the extent to which they are transitioned to skills-based hiring. Thus, the importance for institutions to infuse competencies into all of the activities, because we know that competencies are sort of an umbrella for knowledge, behaviors, and skills. And so that's why we think this is such a critical thing. And you can see here that like 65% of employers are using skills-based hiring. And then the frequency you look at, almost 14% are always doing it, and most of the time just shy of 40%, about half the time 20%. So a majority of employers are using this. And then you can see where they are activating the skills-based hiring activities in the categories here with interviewing and screening and sourcing on the top. So you can see that employers and colleges need to align the competency work that's happening in higher education with this transition to skills-based hiring. We know that these activities on both sides of our membership will lead to a career-ready workforce. We'll be able to identify the gaps through the research and the benchmarking. We think it will lead to higher levels of institutional effectiveness, and we think it will lead to a higher engagement among students, because higher education is making the connection between each aspect of their career, of their academic journey, and how that supports their honing of competencies that we know employers value. So, so we think it'll also lead to enhanced career outcomes for students.
Yeah,
And
just to stick with that,
yeah.
Matthew, I think I just going to want to give a shout out to one of the NACE competency task force that I'm on right now, and committee is kind of really focused on the skills-based hiring, and there's a lot of employers, and we're talking to a lot of employers and engaging them to kind of make sure that it translates, right? And anywhere from classroom to career, there's a number of sayings that individuals use, but I think it's really important to kind of and I commend NACE to kind of for getting really bringing more and more employers to the table over the years. And now with some of this observation or observer data, with those kind of observing students to the extent that they demonstrate certain behaviors, we'll get some real kind of hard data on soft skills or whatever you want to call them, power skills, human skills.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So
take it away.
Yeah, and so that kind of kicks things off with kind of skills, not GPA, and Matthew mentioned it, or kind of it's the new currency of the modern workplace. And for the work that I've done in AI, and I was a founder in residence at the AI Fund in Palo Alto for a while here over the past few years, I think it's really interesting, Matthew, kind of like what we're talking about today is kind of the NACE competencies, and it's important to point out that the NACE competencies are tied to behaviors, and it's really soft skills, right? Or whatever you want to call them, durable skills or power skills. But it's really the skills and behaviors that can't easily be replaced by AI. Because we all know kind of the half-life or the shelf life of a hard skill, or whatever you want to call it, is around 2.5 years right now, and it's rapidly changing because of AI. And so that's kind of where you mentioned kind of some of the themes, the lifelong learning, and just these are the skills and behaviors that are just kind of very important. That's kind of why we're focused on them. And so, unfortunately, the perception out there, and you have data to back this up at NACE, Matthew, is, it's the perception is colleges are falling short, prepare students for work in these skills. And one of the most recent is the SHRM data that says 3 in 4 employers say they have a hard time finding graduates with the necessary soft skills. And I just want to point out, that's the perception. Why employers are so kind of worried about this and scared is a bad hire is extremely costly. And
Yeah.
when you look at it, Sherb said, 89% of the HR leaders believe that why they didn't work out, a particular candidate or employee didn't work out, was they lacked the soft skills for the job. And so there's a lot of time wasted with, onboarding, decreased morale. And yeah, my team of scientists that I've worked with, they always kind of pointed out, a PhD, I was psychologist, they always pointed out kind of these soft skills or these behaviors and the NACE competencies are kind of why somebody's let go or fired, or why they grow in a particular position, they're promoted and they thrive in the workplace. And so that's kind of why it's so important to kind of overcome this perception, and the work that we're doing together, Matthew, is to and Suitable and NACE to kind of figure out, all right, here's some hard data, and here's the data for institutions to kind of address some of these gaps, right? But also to show to the outside world, here's not kind of what we think as an institution. It's not what our faculty think. It's not what the student says through a self-report. It's, all right, here's like, actual employers, or whether they're working on campus or they're a working learner, to constantly get this feedback and improve the behaviors that are tied to the competencies that they're falling short. And maybe they're just self-aware that they're falling short in certain behaviors. And so really it's been a lack of data, and I know kind of NACE is obviously, this is why we're on the call today, is in the webinars, to kind of tell people kind of how we're addressing this data issue. But there's a lot, there's more data issues around kind of I call it the Wild Wild West internships. Obviously, it's we can always do better tracking this, and that's kind of where, it's not just internships, it's the working learners, it's undergraduate research, it's capstone, it's study abroad, it's student employment. But the reality is, like, this is your research, Matthew, is the 5 years running, it's employers identified internship experience as the top differentiator between two equally qualified candidates, and you can't ignore that. And then at least what I'm seeing nationally is, career services, primarily kind of who's on today's webinar, and they lack that data of like where their students are even doing internships. And you've done a fantastic job with First Destination, but it frustrates me when campuses, at least career services, and I feel for them, is a lot of times the first time they learn that a student went through some type of experiential learning is a question in the First Destination survey of, did you go through experiential learning, and
Yeah.
what was it?
Well,
And
and Randy,
and they've already graduated at that point, right?
yeah, and Randy, that's why the assessment tool is so important, because it's accompanied with kind of a demographic profile that a student completes every time they take the assessment. And you built it in partnership with us, so that students can take it multiple times, pre-internship, post-internship, and the demographic profile asks for the status of the student, what year are they on an internship, all of those kinds of things, to kind of fill that data gap that you mentioned. And I think the assessment tool will help significantly with what we think is one of the primary factors for the skills gap, and that's a student's ability to articulate in context what they've learned, the level of skill and competency honing that they've developed over time, and communicate that effectively to employers. So all your data points here are spot on.
Yeah, and overcoming the perceptions and having data and being data informed is incredible. But I think also it's, a lot of this is to help maximize the outcomes of students and make sure that they're, growing and even 10 years out, for those institutions that are collecting that data of, tying this back to behaviors, tying these back to the NACE competencies and their experiences in and outside of the classroom. And I think, what's fascinating is kind of my former research, we with these behaviors, we could reduce turnover for cause by 35% for some of the largest companies out there, just based on the observations of past managers and coworkers.
Yep,
And, it's a real issue for employers because they don't want to make that costly mistake. They want somebody that's going to thrive in the workplace, but then also just kind of data of like where campus is, and they want to help campuses provide that data back to campuses of like, all right, where can they help kind of these soft skills or these competencies, because it's extremely hard work, and we've been working on it for how long, Matthew? Like 5 or 6 years, and it's
definitely.
not easy. So just to kind of point out kind of other kind of national trends that, and we can chat about. I know you spoke in the state of the profession with Tim Harding last week at MPACE. Your presentation kind of about like consumers and like the ROI and the questions that are going on around the ROI of a degree and kind of the student debt. So like, do you
Yeah.
want to point anything out there of like,
Yeah, sure. Let me start in the middle with consumers, whether rather with employers. So we know from our research that 70% of entry-level jobs from our employers require the bachelor's degree. So that in and of itself shows the value of higher education.
yep,
What employers have been doing they've been evaluating their job classifications to ensure that a degree is required. And so that percentage, that 70%, is a result of that analysis, right? So, but there are 30% that don't require it. And I think higher education has a role to play in that, in diversifying their educational offerings to like micro credentials and certifications and other kinds of opportunities. And then we ask students, so we think that's a critical thing for higher ed to focus on because of the population changes. Like there are fewer traditionally aged college eligible students than ever before. There's the enrollment cliff that's happening, so that population is going to shrink further, and it's the most diverse of college eligible, traditional college eligible students in the history of higher education. So all of those kinds of dynamics really make a difference. Yeah, and then
and I'll just point
yeah,
out real quick, we talked about kind of internships being the number one differentiator and kind of, GPA kind of falling every year based on,
yeah,
employers screening on that GPA. But also, it's interesting kind of like having any work experience is one of the top 3 or 4 in that data that comes back from employers.
yeah.
And so, shout out to any of you that work with student employment or, any of these like the co-curricular experiences, and even those that are kind of trying to tackle kind of how to just our working learners and tying this back to ROI and just kind of how there is a lot of student debt out there and paying for tuition. A lot of students are working now and working 20, 30 hours a week. How do we help them articulate kind of these competencies and skills and their experiences, even if they're not in that traditional or say they can't afford to take on a low paid or unpaid internship?
Yeah, I think the assessment tool can be leveraged because it's broken into kind of 2 buckets, right? The student can self-assess, and then the student can invite any observer, could be an internship, an on-campus job, an activity on campus, and any work experiences, part-time or full-time, that they're balancing while going to school. And that can help show the value of any experience that a student has. And I think for students that are not participating in internships because of their lived experiences and the need for them to fund part of their or all of their own education, that's a critical role for career services to help the student in those students involved to understand the value of those work experiences, the transferable skills that employers look for and value. And there's that profile of student that is hustling with a lot of grit and intention to balance both the demands of their life outside of higher education and pursuing a degree or pursuing a certificate. And so that articulation piece is so critical so that those non-internship experiences are valued as much as the paid internship.
Yeah.
So I think you're spot on.
And I would, I would argue like, some of the students, that the working learners, right? They- take a certain behaviors, right? And my research and widely in the research around kind of competencies and skills, one of the number one predictors of future workplace success is like, dependability and like showing up on time.
Yep.
And some aren't self-aware that they're not doing that or think it's okay to show up constantly 5 minutes late. But yeah, to kind of handle that schedule, that heavy schedule of I guess, your class load, then you have a job and there's just more and more kind of students that are taking care of family and have a wide range of responsibilities and they pick up a lot of these skills and they just need to know how to articulate it.
That's exactly right. Yep.
And
You're
so,
spot
so
on.
just quickly to kind of lawmakers, this fascinates me because, shows out there that there's about 37 states now, Matthew, that are kind of implementing some type of a measurement
Yep.
of career readiness. And I appreciate NACE and kind of our partnership just because, like, I think we're leading the way on a lot of this. Um, because yeah, there's a lot of just measurement out there that's it's not backed by data and you know it, that's kind of where this is just important work no matter how you're trying to measure it. Yeah, I think we've taken this big step forward with this assessment.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, we advocate with elected officials in the federal government, and we collaborate and meet with folks from the Department of Education, Department of Labor to share our data, show the impact of paid experiences, in particular internship, and how that positively impacts the number of job offers, the entry-level salary, all of the things that go along with it, along with the disparities that exist around all of this, particularly with non-majority students and the impact of not participating in these high impact practices and experiences and the impact that has on their economic and social mobility. And so we are constantly and regularly advocating for these positive changes that will ultimately lead to our collective goal as an association and as a membership. And that's to achieve equitable employment outcomes for all students. So yeah, spot on.
So I want to kind of just go through why now. Obviously, you have the enrollment cliff and you have I guess what I get excited about is more and more institutions, even over the past 2 weeks here at MPACE and SOACE at these conferences, just more and more, whether it's strategic plans, QEPs, are built around just even the NACE competencies or career readiness in general. And yeah, it makes sense because, I see it as one of the most important drivers of enrollment growth during kind of this enrollment cliff and rightfully so, right? Students and parents see kind of career outcomes as their top reason for attending these institutions. And so, yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, I know you see kind of similar things, but like, it's pretty exciting that as kind of an association and all this
Yeah.
hard work you're putting in, like, Any trends that you see, or like any tips for everyone today of like how do you start pushing kind of that, for those that are involved in kind of building out their future strategic plans, whether it's at the career center level, like
Yeah.
their division, or even most of the time I'm seeing it at the institution level now in their strategic plans.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think career services is at a moment in time where they can leverage the momentum around more and more institutions looking at career outcomes and career readiness as a part of their institutional priorities. And if they're not, then that you can use the data points from this presentation and the others that we put together here at NACE to make the case for it, to try to influence an institution's strategic priorities.
Mhm.
We've also seen a growing percentage of career centers being strategically positioned at the cabinet level, reporting to the provost, that sort of thing, so that they have impact on developing the strategies that lead to institutional effectiveness and in employment outcomes. And then there are some that maybe aren't there yet. And my advice to the folks that are in that kind of position is to beta test with other like-minded, enthusiastic colleagues across campus around implementing a career readiness initiative in a way that can track the impact on students over the course of that experience, and then leverage those outcomes to share that with leadership to say, look what happens when we work together to implement a career readiness project. And then advocate for expanding that across the entire campus.
Yeah,
Somebody had a Randy, somebody had a follow-up question in the chat, Charlotte, about did we say that paid internships are seen as more valuable than unpaid internships to employers? What I would say is that the data shows that when a student participates in a paid internship, they end up with more offers and a higher salary than those that never interned or participated in unpaid internships. And there's a little bit of a nuance here in that paid internships tend to be with for-profit companies that are large and use their internships to convert interns to full-time hires. It's a part of their strategy. It's their number one ROI for identifying entry-level talent. And then there could be the dynamic that unpaid internships are with smaller organizations, maybe more so in the nonprofit space, and they value interns, but they can't convert them to full-time because of the size of their organization, those sorts of things. So there is kind of a dynamic there to pay attention to. But I appreciate the question, Colette.
Yeah,
And
it's
back to you,
great
Randy.
question. No, absolutely. So, I'll just point out one other thing is, at these conferences, especially SOAS and MPAs, I've never run into so many, and have had so many conversations with kind of the elevated individuals that are reporting to the provost, right? And it's just amazing to kind of to see that, it's important. You might not be there yet, but it's certainly an exciting trend.
Yeah, and sorry, my camera just went off for no reason whatsoever. I'm working on it, but I'm still here. I would direct people to the Strategic Positioning of Career Services report that a task force of career services leaders contributed to. I'm going to try to find a link and put it in the chat before our webinar is over, but that might provide some insights, some guidance, some ideas for those centers that are on their journey to be strategically positioned and are still working toward that. So stay tuned, I'll get that, and I'm still working on my camera.
No, it's fine. But Matthew, that's one of my favorite reports just because it helps the dialogue. And obviously career leaders kind of articulate kind of why they should have a seat at the table and why this should be in their strategic plan. And um, the bigger thing that we're talking about today is kind of our data, and no longer are they just taking this, campuses over COVID, we learned a few things, one size doesn't fit all, and there's a number of things, and but another thing that we learned is, with the digital transformation and data-formed decisions, that's kind of why we're talking about kind of assessment today and hard data on soft skills and the competencies is, we want to kind of empower institutions with data to better signal to employers and prove to employers kind of how and where these learners are acquiring these skills and competencies. And whether it's inside of the outside of the classroom, I think, a lot of kind of our beginning work with this is, internships. It's easier to get, observers that your managers, your coworkers can rate to the extent that you demonstrated these behaviors, but also kind of bringing in the classroom first year experience, those foundational classes, and some I've even seen kind of have this, on the way in before students even go and show up first day. So it's all around kind of being able to actually reference some of this data and show, here, how can I kind of build on these skills and articulate these skills to employers in a way that the employer can value, trust, and understand is really important.
Totally agree. And just for those that are on the call, I did drop a link to that strategic positioning report. So if you follow it, you'll be able to download it.
And so, Matthew, we're going to jump into all the attendees, we're going to jump into kind of the direct competency assessment designed by Suitable. And so, again, my background is, co-founding kind of the career readiness side of Skills Survey. We had 4,000 companies use kind of and really kind of stress the importance and data, like I mentioned, reducing turnover for calls by 35% at a major hospital or corporation or organization that this is important to really encourage or even require students to go ahead and request this constructive feedback, because there are a lot of like self-report stuff out there, right, Matthew? And historically, it's been self-report or it's different departments across an institution using kind of their own kind of type of assessment where rarely does the student see the result based on the observations of others, but there's no aggregate data. And so I'm going to jump into kind of just like what the assessment's all about. And bear with me, I'm going to go ahead and just like bring up kind of Suitable and what we're doing here. And so, and feel free to chime in. I'm just going to show kind of just baseline kind of what happens with some of this. But you want to kind of explain kind of the model? It's a 4-point scale, but essentially what we've seen and what we're developing is a way for students to add as many evaluators or observers as they'd like based on any type of experience. It could go be a capstone, it could be a first year experience, but it could be a co-op or an internship. It could be a working learner that's working outside of the classroom, and to the extent that they've, demonstrated or are aware of these behaviors, that, there's 3 to 5 kind of behaviors or subsets that are tied to each of the NACE competencies. And to get this feedback back, we'll get into actually what the student would see here. The student also fills out this and rates themselves, right? So there is a self-report component to it based off of, emerging knowledge to advanced application for these behaviors. But I've seen upwards of, I think the record is a student had 14 evaluators from kind of a 4 to 6
Amazing.
month work experience. And it's just amazing to kind of, to have that much feedback. And I'll point out, sometimes students aren't self-aware that they're falling short with some of these behaviors that could really kind of make or break kind of the workplace. Again, I go
Yeah.
back to my showing up and showing up on time is critical.
And Randy, I would just add that there's a couple of things that I think attendees who decide to partner with Suitable that can really enhance the value of this tool. One is an educational piece to make sure that students are familiar with the the NACE Career Readiness Competency Framework. They understand kind of the NACE 8. They understand that employers have validated those competencies as the kind of evergreen kind of competency and skill set that they look for, regardless of industry, regardless of specific position. Because as you mentioned, Mandy, they're sort of like the durable skills that last beyond a particular job category or a particular job skill. So that's important. And the second thing is that we develop these categories as an assessment and not an inventory. If you've ever taken an inventory, it gives you a Likert scale. It's got words that tell you whether you're excellent or need work, but it's not descriptive of the stage you're in. It's not descriptive of the next stage you need to aspire to. And so we intentionally developed this assessment tool so that, Randy, if you're a student and you take oral communication and you say you're at the understanding level, you can read emerging and see where you've come from. And you can also read early application and advanced application and understand what the next steps are in your development and your proficiency. And then you can reach out to your career center to say, hey, I'm at this stage. What are the things I should be doing between now and next semester that will help me get from understanding to early application, and beyond that, from early application to advanced application? So we were very intentional in making sure this was an assessment rubric and not an inventory.
Well, and I'll kind of add a step further. It's not even the student reaching out to the Career Center anymore. It's Career Centers having this data at their fingerprints and the finger points, and just being like really being able to bring. I want to see all students that are compared to how students were rated nationally, and that's kind of, we'll get into the national norms, but how these students at my campus were rated compared to how other students were rated nationally. Maybe I want to see all students that are in the lowest 20th percentile and how they were rated compared to how others were rated in communication and critical thinking. And, largely with my long history in this space and expertise, that's part of the reason kind of ended up and a major reason that I came up and joined the founders of Suitable was, you have to have ways to have kind of indirect, I guess, assessment as well, or actionable ways to, all right, let's have predictive nudging, or let's nudge through a push notification to all the students that are falling short on our campus that are first year students in the lowest 20th percentile compared to other students, and where they're falling short in certain competencies, and even taking this a step further. So, I'll just kind of talk about kind of, some of you might be like, why should I be using kind of a standardized assessment, right? And so this is the biggest thing that I love to go through is, at least at Suitable, we've kind of focused on of a variety of custom questions that can either be uh, just just for supervisors, just for coworkers, maybe just for the student, but any type of custom questions that you want to add to that particular these sets of standardized. So it is consistent, it's reliable, it's scientifically validated around the competencies, but whatever type of data that is important for, say, assurance of learning and AACSB if you're a business school, or ABET. I see a lot of campuses adding the ABET questions and correlating this data of, for the first time, behaviors and competencies and tying them to actual accreditation, which is amazing. So I think there's important piece of, with my history in the space, like I've focused on scale because for those of you that are kind of, testing out the paper form, that's incredible, or kind of the PDF form that Matthew was mentioning earlier. Once you do that, I invite you to have a conversation. I would be happy to have a conversation of just kind of how that's going for you, and once you're done testing it, how do you make it scale? Because I think Matthew, I keep on saying it, it's critical that every student is kind of requesting this feedback, this constructive feedback from others early and often.
That's right. Access, is critical. Equitable access is critical. I wanted to address in the moment a couple of questions that came in that relate to this. Who else can complete this besides the student? Well, Randy's probably going to show you in a minute, but there's an observer. We call them observers. That's any individual who has had a look into the life of a student in ways that are meaningful through the experiences that they've had. So it could be a professor, it could be a coach, if they're an athlete, it could be an advisor to a student organization, a work study manager, and then any employer that they've interacted with for part-time jobs, full-time jobs, internships, et cetera, et cetera. So any observer that the student feels like this person knows them well enough to give me some feedback on how they view my level of proficiency in these competencies. And what's nice, it's I think on a 25 point, there's 25 items total. So it's not a heavy lift for the observer to go in and rate the student on 25 items that are connected to each of the competencies. Thanks for
Yeah, and
that
there's a number
question,
of
Lori.
things. Oh, yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, and so just to you can break it down by observer, right? So if I wanted to break it down by managers and not coworkers, I could do that, or supervisors, not coworkers, or say career advisors. We have a number of kind of, I guess, personas that, you can break it down so they identify. But yeah, students can, you can require a student to have one or two supervisors kind of fill this out, or one coworker, one supervisor, say if it's an internship. But if you don't know that, you can, like I mentioned, kind of a student had 14, another had 10 different kind of supervisors, coworkers, team members at some internships. And it's just amazing feedback. Now, kind of what I'm showing you today is kind of what we've been working for years on is the career readiness report. And so one thing I see is, and I mentioned this earlier, is yes, it's the consistent kind of behaviors that are tied to and the rating scale and the instrument tied to, the NACE rubric and assessment. But you can add your own custom questions. You can have your different departments have different kind of flavors of this. But what I've seen kind of, for those that have been doing kind of like in-house for a long time, or just like collecting random kind of evaluation forms from say a post-internship from your supervisor, is that the student doesn't really have like any artifacts or ways to kind of share this evidence. And that's what I'm going to take you through today is a student, say they invite two coworkers or two supervisors, one coworker, or any type of, and they do a self-assessment. This is kind of what they would receive back. So you'd be able to see who rated this student. And then on the left-hand side here, you see kind of their overall rating. But then you can break it down by observer. But also what's great is I can see kind of, all right, here in color, how they were rated by their observers, and in gray, how they rated themselves. But I could also click into each NACE competency. And this is kind of really where the power is. All right. I'm a student, I get this feedback. I can now review it with my supervisor. I can get peer reviews. I can intervene with students that maybe this student, if you can see in gray, that I call these students overestimators. They're rating themselves higher and much higher than their evaluators, so that they're not self-aware that they're falling short in these behaviors, and it can bring them back, and you can kind of coach them through this type of feedback. And so with this, you can kind of see, under critical thinking, overall, they rated themselves a 3, but overall it was 2, and you can kind of see here's some big discrepancies. So I will add, once you click into any of these, part of it is typically kind of the 1 through 4 builds their confidence, because it's delivered in a way that anywhere from emerging to advanced application, it's kind of a soft feedback where you can see and build their confidence. But then on the right hand side, Matthew, we talked about national norms, right? And so this is kind of the thing that we really kind of worked on in the first iteration of the career readiness project a few years ago. But really kind of we're building out norms so you can see how you were rated compared to how other students similar to you were rated. And you can see what percentile you're in. So what this does is, left-hand side builds your confidence, but the right-hand side, the national norms, it doesn't give students a false sense of competence either. And just several this, even at SOAS here, is there's no checkbox that, and I know a lot of people are looking for some checkbox that a student's going to be mastering a particular competency. This is just as often as possible, can you just get this feedback? There's going to be different types of experiences, whether it's student employment, internships, undergraduate research, other things in the classroom, capstone, that you just constantly want to get this feedback. And I'm a big believer, Matthew, if you can change even one behavior underneath the competency, it could mean a lifetime of difference, with outcomes with a student, because a lot of times they're just not, they just don't know they're falling short in a particular behavior.
Yeah, that's so true. I wanted to address another question that popped in. How do you address the synergies between the competencies? Like there's overlap, perceived overlap between like teamwork and communication. You have to communicate well in order to be a good team member. We addressed that when we did the behavior validation process with skill survey. Our research team, Josh Kahn, who has a PhD in assessment, did a factor analysis that allowed us to single out behaviors that are connected to only one particular competency. And we ruled out and eliminated behaviors where there was overlap between the two so that the behaviors were evidence-based and reliable as a signal of proficiency for a particular competency. And that work carried into the assessment tool development through that 18 months process I mentioned to make sure that that same separation, that same uniqueness was built into the assessment tool. So
And
in
I was just
practice,
go,
yeah, in
go
practice
ahead.
they overlap, but in our research they are unique and separate. Thanks for
And
that
these are
question.
just made up behaviors. Like with my work with Skill Survey, we had over 50 million job candidates rated by managers and coworkers and over 20 validity studies. So what we did was um, it's behaviors that have been proven to predict outcomes for job candidates that we synced with HR platforms, then follow them in the workplace. So a lot of this work is kind of carried on, with some of the newer work that's happening now, and it's just it's super exciting to kind of see that yes, you can have your own flavor and add your custom questions or even questions. Matthew, I know kind of one of my favorite questions, would you work with a student again in the future? And we include that on a lot of these if it's the right type of experience, say it's like an internship. We never show students that, but it's again in the macro level, they'll never see that on the report. But to be able to bring up a dashboard and say, I want to see all students that their evaluator or their supervisor said that they would not, confidentially not work with that student again. Typically, those are overestimators and they rate themselves much higher than their evaluators. And it's a perfect intervention type of tool to kind of either address, a specific student, or I want to see all students that are falling short in a specific competency compared to how they were rated, compared to how others were rated nationally, and kind of address some of these gaps. And one of my favorites is, even with the open-ended questions, we theme them out too, and we found that students, yes, they're on their phones too much in these experiences, but a lot of them are just not asking questions. And that was one of the biggest kind of themes I've seen is employers are frustrated with it. It's you want to kind of then start building that into your kind of first year and foundational courses of like, all right, we noticed this with our employers and the feedback on students demonstrate or not demonstrating certain things in the workplace. How do we bring that back in early and often and address some of those things? So they kind of show that kind of intellectual curiosity when they get to the on these experiences, and they're not sitting there silent and not asking questions. But I'll tell you, there are certain students that ask too many questions too, Matthew. But I know we're kind of running up to time here, so
Yeah.
um, again, I will go back to the deck here and bear with me.
And Randy, while you're doing that, I just wanted to address a question from Mark about how does the suitable NACE career product differ from others? So I can't speak to others, but what I can tell you, and I dropped a link in the chat so you can click on that and read more if you haven't already. We met the highest standards of assessment tool methodology of any assessment on the market. And we did that intentionally because we want to make sure that anything that we do at NACE is evidence-based, trustworthy. It does what it says it will do over time in the same manner. And that's kind of the foundation of any assessment related tool. And the link I provided shares you, will lead you to a technical document where you can read through the methodology if you have any questions about that. I would just say, if you're thinking about other options, ask about the methodology for validation, reliability, and usability, and make sure that it meets the highest standards so that you can rely on and your students can benefit from engaging in any tool that you decide to use.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think, Matthew, I think, I'm a serial entrepreneur in the space and been researching competencies and behaviors for the past 6 or 7 years and at scale. And I think, well, yeah, when I took a look at the market and how kind of NACE was pushing this forward, I quickly kind of chose Suitable as kind of a way to again, they've been doing kind of the indirect and gamification of competencies for such a long time at schools like Pitt, Temple, University of Florida, like hundreds of schools, and that's great. But when you kind of mesh it with kind of direct assessment, it gets really exciting, folks. It's cool to think that we can now kind of reimagine. If you go to nace.suitable.co, we have an amazing task force of and I've been doing a least listening tour just to make sure that, yes, assessment is not the most exciting topic, folks. And, students aren't jumping to do it. But if you can gamify it, if you can encourage it, you can show them data that, this is going to make a lifelong impact and they need this feedback. It's pretty incredible. So to that note, if we have any other questions, Matthew, I appreciate you kind of monitoring the questions.
Yeah, you were running slides, so I was happy to do it.
But I'll say, and I think this is for you too. Like Matthew, you're always on campuses, kind of, or just having conversations. We're always having conversations about competencies. But yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to me, and I was looking at my LinkedIn handle here, if you call it a handle, but it's interview because my interview stream days. But yeah, that's my LinkedIn handle. If you want to reach out to me and just have a conversation about kind of where this space is going, what I'm seeing nationally, like what the data says so far, and kind of what your approach is. Like, there's certain campuses that are going to move at different paces, or there's decentralized, centralized, all sorts of complex and nuanced environments on campuses. But happy to just geek out on competencies with anyone on this call.
And I would just like to say thank you all for joining us. We hope you found this useful and beneficial and informative about why NACE is pursuing these partnerships, what we're trying to accomplish with it, and your part in it. And I encourage you all to continue to elevate your role in your institution, because career services are uniquely qualified to contribute to the effectiveness of an institution and the outcomes of students. Here's a link to shameless plug for NACE 25, our NACE conference in Philly. And if you heard my dog in the background, I apologize. So thank you all for joining. Have a great rest of your day. And of course, as always, have a NACE day.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now.